Hello everybody. Welcome to today's BA session. And today we're talking about Pareto analysis. I'm really pleased to be joined by two excellent guests to talk about that very subject. Let's start by actually introducing my two guests. So I'll start with yourself, Lalita, to introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Sure. Thank you, John. I'm Lalita Lalwani. I work with the IIBA Ireland chapter as VP of Professional Development, and also I work with version 1 as Senior Business Analyst. Thank you so much, John, for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the topic. And I'm all set to share my views. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And Sarah, over to you, please.
Yes, thanks again, John. It's great to join to talk about the wonderful Pareto analysis and the experience I've had. My name's Sarah O'Neill. I've been a business analyst for, I think, 5+ years. Previously, an analyst in different forms, app support, tester. And I've had a wonderful sort of journey of using a few professional techniques, and one of those being Pareto analysis. I currently work at Hiscox, UK, which is a big insurance firm, and we are on our agile journey. So yeah, lots of exciting times for me at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you both again. So let's get straight into it, really. And as we're talking about Pareto analysis, we should probably ask, what is Pareto analysis, and when is it, and how is it used in BA? So, Lalita, over to you for that question, please.
Sure. So Pareto analysis is basically it's a decision analysis technique, and the better name and the well-known name for this technique is 80-20 rule. So what is this technique? This is basically we identify 20% of the, for example, if I want to identify that what 20% of area is giving me the revenue in the company, then it's 80-20. So identify those 20% where we can work and achieve the 80% of target. Now, how do we use it in business analysis? As I said, that this is a decision technique. And in business analyst mode, we have to make a lot of decisions. We have to connect with the stakeholders to help them to make a lot of decisions. So this technique is really useful there. Like I generally use this technique when there are many conflicts within the stakeholders regarding the requirements, at that which requirements do they need to take first and work on those. So this analysis gives me the 20% of the requirements on which, if they work, the 80% work is done. So that's how we use it.
Excellent. Thank you, Lalita. And Sarah, over to you, please.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I mean, Pareto analysis is very much described as, the 80% of the benefit for a project perhaps can come from 20% of the work. 80% of the problems can come, from 20% of the issues there. Pareto, 1896's book, I think that's when he sort of announced that this would be a great tool for decision making. So there's a bit of history there in a French book that I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce. But yeah, in my experience, it's a great tool for complementing root cause analysis and decision making. It's helped me, forge a path of direction with some stakeholders and significant problems in the past. And it's one of them tools or professional techniques that you often see on a business analysis skills matrix, but nobody's ever touched it, used it. So bringing it to life through a few case studies, I think it is really helpful on this call and internally in your organization, I guess, as well.
I would agree. And I think it was Lalita and I was saying just offline before we started that one of those techniques that we often hear about, definitely apply like the 80-20 rule in a lot of cases, but probably don't think about it as much as we could,
No,
so it's definitely good to talk about it in a more formal sense and recognize it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I'd say as well, for myself, I haven't come from a technology background before. I was an analyst in forms. And I think when you first hear about a tool like this, if you're not a spreadsheet queen or king, you can think, oh, I don't really want to, touch that. If it sounds complex, if it's not your bag, graphs or mathematics, whatever. And it's, it's about not being scared of these tools that we have at hand. We've actually got quite a bit of help that we can use in, graphical tools in Excel. So yeah, I think it's a great tool, not as complex as what one might originally think.
That's it. And
Absolutely
I'm
not.
sure we'll probably explore some of that a little bit further as well during the session. I mean, I think, you know, you've both done an excellent job of sort of describing it. I mean, for me, really, there's really not too much to add. Possibly with the exception that, you know, it isn't something we just have to apply to problems or issues. We can apply it to, you know, assessing which opportunities are going to provide the best benefit, you know, and that's generally along that view that, you know, 20% of the population are going to provide 80% of the benefit, or 80% of the issues come from 20% of the transactions, as it were. Then it's just about applying that mentality and trying to find, I guess, the few the few issues or the few opportunities that from which you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, really, and the biggest benefit, which is really why we're doing the analysis in the first place. So based on the excellent introduction you've both done, and me adding a very tiny bit to it at the end, be interesting to know, starting with Sarah, really, as to really in which situations you would use, or if you use Pareto and it's valuable, and perhaps why as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really useful tool when, you know, resources are pretty constrained. So we're always stuck for time, stuck for people in the world of business analysis. And there's often, you know, complex problems or a number of solution options that we need to analyze and prioritize and just try and get a bloody decision on, basically. And that can be tough. And I think using a tool like Pareto Analysis can really make leadership, your colleagues, see something that they can trust a little bit more. There are nuances in things to their challenges. It's like any other root cause analysis tool. It's not, you know, a completely straight benefit. There are challenges and things that we'll talk about, I'm sure, on this webinar. But yeah, I found it really useful when it's been a case of we perhaps had a need for defect analysis, or there's been a large volume of data and potential root causes, and we can't really see the wood for the trees. And we need to delve a bit deeper into root cause analysis and then present, yeah, I think you touched on it, there's some opportunities to make life better, improve what, what the problems are. And where we have a number of solution options or pathways we could take using Pareto analysis to look at, you know, the vital few as we've highlighted, and where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, can really just make that path forward a little bit easier, you know, optimizing progress, I think, and the efforts of your team. So really, you know, where we need to focus on making progress, although root cause analysis in and of itself is not necessarily a quick thing. In the end, if we do it right, Pareto analysis and other methods, you know, similar to it, can make that decision-making process go a little bit smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. Lalita, your perspective on that as well, please.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Sarah here that we can use it in the quality improvement processes and prioritizing the task. But another useful case of this technique, which I have used in one of my projects, is I look back to the technique when we are in the firing mode and release is about to go for a project. Then, and if it is a delay, then everybody finger point that, okay, because of this team, there's a delay, or because of that team, there's a delay. Rather than going to solution mode, they finger point that, okay, this team and that team. In that case, Pareto analysis can help us really that just figure out who did the delay, and ultimately turned out that no team is to be blamed for any delays. There's completely another factor for the delays. So in that way, we can build the consensus between the teams and then resolve the conflicts and work towards the solution rather than onto the finger pointing to each other. So it's really useful there as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think the only thing I would add on top of that is really it's sometimes useful in terms of not just assigning priorities, but actually figuring out who we assign resources to, which is somewhat a byproduct, of course, of prioritizing, and you assign people to the highest priority items. But certainly having a view of that Pareto analysis in a quite simplistic way, which it often is, quite easy to see, you know, those areas of biggest value to focus in on, I would say. So yeah, not too much more to add from that from me. I think Be good as well to get a view from you, and then perhaps to start with Lalita on this one, in terms of an example of how you've gone about creating or executing a Pareto analysis or conducting.
To create Pareto analysis, we need data, because without data, we cannot create any chart. So if I'll take the example of, say, customer complaints, and we are planning to see that how our contact center is performing. So we will get the customer complaints, number of complaints, and then we can divide that customer complaints into the segments that which areas we are getting the complaints. If it is related to the contact center representatives, it is related to the product, if it is related to any other service. And then we draw the chart and see that from where we are getting the 80% complaints. And that 20% area, if we resolve that, then we can resolve the 80% of the customer complaints. That's how we work with the Pareto analysis.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. And in terms of the method for Pareto analysis, yeah, you've got to start with identifying the problem, haven't you? So you've got to list out all those root causes and truly try and understand the root causes as well. Ensure that they're not just symptoms. I think we'll touch on, other sort of methods that can complement that to make sure you can trust your data. But it's all about identifying the root causes of the problems, and you have to, apply a score to those problems, categorizing, and then the cumulative effect, and then using a tool where you can present your Pareto chart, for instance, to make it visual. I think that's the main benefit, one of the main benefits of having Pareto analysis. You can present a Pareto chart and it makes it really visual. You can slap that on a report for your exec summary, and it makes it a nice tool to sort of communicate, again, where you can focus first, really.
That's right. And actually building on that, that root cause analysis, sometimes you might see slightly different but very related root causes as well. So sometimes, depending on the amount of data, the amount of issues, the amount of root causes, can often be quite helpful to block them into themes. And then based on those themes, as we're saying, really just think about some of those metrics that you can apply to all of those themes of issues or all those themes of opportunities, so that you can ultimately apply a score, really. And then what you want to be able to do is, of course, identify those issues, the top 20% of issues that probably, in terms of coverage of population or cost or whatever measure you're viewing the impact on, that they're probably the 20% or approximate to 20% that will probably provide the best place to focus first, anyway. And I think that's probably, for me, is a bit of an important point to raise on Pareto analysis. It isn't that we're ditching the other 80%. It's just that we're prioritizing the first 20%. And potentially, if we prioritize the first 20%, we can then conduct another Pareto analysis on the remaining 80, because we might find that of that 80%, there is a small group that might be prioritized more highly to review as well. Yeah, I think that's all I would have.
Yep.
Yeah, you've got to remember that, when you've scored these root causes, you've applied a score of their significance. So by focusing on the first 20%, you've got those most significant factors, the vital few, in there. And when it comes to, obviously, that data, that's where you want to tackle first, really.
Yeah, and talking about data is a nice introduction to maybe a point of real interest in terms of how you typically would approach collecting the data that you need to support your Pareto analysis. I'll start with you on that one, Sarah. You kindly introduced the topic.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I think, I don't know if it'd be helpful to bring a case study to light. I will make a disclaimer. I've used Pareto analysis a number of 2 times in my whole career. As I said before, it's one of the skills and the tools that's in the toolkit, and you can just whip it out, obviously, when you need it. Now, early in my BA career, I think I was so lucky because I was allocated, let's say, a really significant financial business problem to unpick. And it was all, you know, connected to a big system implementation, and nobody could really understand what this financial data was doing between the new policy admin system and the general ledger. So we had a significant volume and value discrepancy and issue, and I won't go into too much detail, but it was something we had to tackle and tackle fast. Obviously, financial data is regulated, etc. So there was a big drive to obviously improve and fix, you know, correct, prevent, control, you know, future instances. So in that sense, for me, collecting the data was quite easy because I was looking at two different systems which had a data download, you know, looking at business intelligence. So in that scenario, if you're dealing with something that's quite straightforward in terms of here's your data, you want to be looking at obviously the time frame that you need to collect that data over. So if I was thinking about the instance that I had, you know, I was looking at bank reconciliation data. So there's different periods, obviously, that I could look at to analyse, you know, the root causes. So we did have to come to an agreement by, you know, agreeing with senior stakeholders, how far are we going to go back? We've had this system a year or so now. So where are we going to focus our efforts? So you have to agree on a time frame. But what you have to be mindful of, especially if you're in the maybe a finance space, is that actually you might have rare events in terms of your data. So one of the things to watch out for is not always to just look at the most frequently occurring issues. Look at obviously value and volume, frequency. So value being how significant maybe a financial transaction is. That was something certainly I had to look at in terms of collecting my data. But maybe something that might happen annually in that data set. So you can't discount that. So you do have to be pretty thorough in terms of collecting data quantitatively, but also qualitatively as well, making sure that you do have those interviews, those sessions with the people who know. In my case, it was a bunch of accountants who became my best mates for a year whilst we worked to unpick this problem. But really, yeah, I think if it was something more less clean cut in terms of you haven't got two systems that are presenting a data download for you, I would approach it by, you know, conducting interviews and collecting, you know, data by maybe having to monitor if it was in a maybe even monitor process if we were looking at sort of a time-based exercise. So I think it would be a case of consulting all the other BA tools like workshops, you know, time-based studies, and trying to collect data by speaking to the stakeholders, and probably as we would in any other sort of business analysis scenario.
That's right. Yeah, and certainly you mentioned a few things I would have thought of in the first earlier on in preparation for these questions, and I mean things like the timeliness of the data is really important, because obviously out of date data can paint quite a different picture and send you in quite the wrong direction. The quality of the data, and obviously in the example you outlined there, it's coming from two systems, two reliable systems. You know, accounting systems where you expect them to be more accurate perhaps than others. That you know, it gives you that sense of confidence that actually the data on which you're basing your analysis is stable enough to not paint an incorrect picture. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So really, yeah.
No, sorry. And just, even if you have something that's presenting data, it's not explaining the root cause. So it might show a symptom. You know, somebody might have pressed a button, and therefore we have a transaction in the system that has appeared erroneously that we didn't expect, and we can't match it off with its other system. However, it's probably not the root cause. The root cause might be training, or the fact that the system allows the person to do that thing. So it's about digging deeper. And that's kind of what I like about Pareto analysis. You know, it does highlight and help us with the decision making around, you know, the solutions, the problems, but it's a bit of an avenue to dig deeper as well.
That's it. And you made a good example of connecting sort of the Pareto analysis to data analysis that we might do as BAs, and a few other, certainly been a few other techniques as well that we mentioned. But I won't steal all the thunder, as I know Lalita is yet to provide her perspective on that particular question.
Yeah, sure. So as Sarah really mentioned well, that Pareto analysis gives us the flavor of what could be a symptom or what could be a reason to dig deeper. And this is a decision making technique, so it goes hand in hand with more mainly techniques which are involved in the decision making, and it involves the data as well. So data analysis, data modeling, and if I talk about root cause analysis, all these techniques go hand in hand with the Pareto analysis, because Pareto is based on the data. If you don't have the data, and I mean not about the garbage data, because wherever we say, okay, if it is garbage data, then it's obviously garbage in, garbage out. You need to have the accurate data, comprehensive data, and related to the problem which we are trying to solve. If data is not related to the problem, then also we'll not get the output. So all the data analysis, data modeling, all these techniques would go with the Pareto analysis, and obviously root cause analysis, because Pareto's gives us the flavors of the ideas. Okay, this is the area where you should dig deeper and see what is causing the root cause, and then maybe having those root cause in place, we can map that into the Pareto and identify that which root causes are actually causing the problems and work with those.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice that we're talking as well about different techniques, as I said before, as how these things join up. I mean, root cause analysis is really quite a fundamental technique, how to bring this together. There's the, maybe the less formal technique of being able to, assess data analysis, do data analysis in a formal or informal way, but actually just being able to review the data, I think as Sarah was saying, and find some themes and able to present that in an orderly way, to use that as a basis for your analysis. I think hopefully the audience of this session will actually hear a few techniques that they're familiar with and realise actually there's often, as there often is, a nice connection between many of the techniques we're using, and they're just a small part of a big story that we end up telling with BAs. I wonder as well, and not to put you under any pressure, we've sort of obviously covered a few techniques, but are there any other related techniques that you think you might sometimes use in conjunction with or connection to Pareto analysis? And I'll start with you, Lalita, on that one.
I actually generally use the process modeling technique along with the Pareto. It is very, you would say, weird combination to use, but then process modeling generally helps in identify the gaps in the process. And Pareto can help us to draw that where are the major gaps. Like BAs are change enablers, and we see that many people are really resist to change. So if you want to change any process and we go with lot of changes, then it's a strict no, we don't want to change. So if we go ahead with only a bit of, or I would say 20% of changes, which can improve the 80% of process. So I use that technique along with the process modeling and identify the 20% area, or if it is a huge process, then only 10% of area, which can improve the 90% of the process. Then I go ahead with those 10% area, because it will give me from strict no to, okay, maybe we can try this. So it helps me to onboard all the stakeholders with the change.
And it's, I guess, another really good example of how techniques like process, which is such a powerful and almost like the spine of a lot of things we do as analysts, a lot of things anyway, not everything, but is a good way to relate to the Pareto analysis and to the root cause analysis. And it makes me think actually that sometimes a way to consider how to group your issues might be based on the process, and that might work. But for some, actually uncovering the issues that are subject to the Pareto analysis may have come from exploring the process and thinking about the issues, or indeed the opportunities against it as well. So an excellent introduction to techniques we hadn't yet talked about. So perfect. And Sarah, you have any views on any additional techniques to mention?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about explaining where it sits in terms of when I use Pareto analysis, and I'll give a shout out to my BA mentor at the time. I mean, I was a very new BA; it was all very new to me. I hadn't used Pareto analysis, and I was a little bit scared. I thought, oh, it's seems a bit out there, really. Can we not just like look practically, oh, that looks like it's gone wrong, and investigate defects? But actually, it was so good to work with somebody who'd used it before. And I would say with anybody sort of watching these calls, if you haven't used these skills or, you know, developed any of these professional techniques yet, just try and find somebody in your organization who has, or watch these calls, or try and watch a few of the YouTube videos and all the other resources out there, and try and connect with somebody who's used it. But for me, I was actually in more of a Lean Six Sigma environment at the time, and we were running a DMake style project. And we sort of, when I say we, me and my BA mentor had sort of designed this project. It was very much a problem solving mission to begin with. And DMake, you know, it's a five-step problem solving approach within Lean Six Sigma for anybody who hasn't used it. D being define, M being measure, analyze, improve, and control, I believe. So another good sort of methodology to look into. But this very much set in the analyze to improve space Pareto. And we were able to obviously collect the initial data through how I said, because we had very clear, you know, BI that presented that data for us. But other techniques, such as maybe the 5 whys, obviously interviewing our accountancy stakeholders at the time for that particular example, was very, very important. And it wasn't necessarily that we used Pareto analysis when we just identified the root causes. We grouped our root causes against solution options. So we had about 50 to 60 root causes from lots of different erroneous activity, people pressing buttons in this new system that the system would allow them to. So we had a lot of different root causes. So that meant that we had, you know, quite a significant amount of solution options. And it was the solution options that we used the Pareto analysis on to say, okay, if you follow these solution options, these will be attributed to these root causes, and therefore, you know, you should be able to fix these root causes and certainly control and prevent them for the future. Again, going back to where you need to focus on the vital few to get the biggest benefit. So as I said, you know, it would sat within that methodology, which we'll hear about in the BA space, and potentially, you know, people watching the call have followed, but very much using tools like 5 whys, maybe the fishbone diagram, Ishikawa, you know, cause and effect diagram, trying to find, yes, okay, we've got symptoms, but are we really identifying those root causes? And really, that would be my advice. You know, if you get to a stage in a project or value stream, whatever work stream you're working in, and you think that you need a decision-making tool, and Pareto can potentially help, just do some research and on other root cause methods that you can bring in, because I think it's not a hard and fast rule. You know, there's no hard advice to only use these methods or these tools. I think there's quite a plethora of things that you can dip into. Again, ask your BA mentors, colleagues, what they've used. I think it's all about communicating and sharing successes when it comes to these things, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, and that always makes me think of like our theoretical BA toolkit, and everyone has a slightly different toolkit, or I guess like any profession, we all have, each of us will have a slightly different tool that we prefer to use. Might be process, it might be Pareto, it might be something else. But yeah, definitely getting out there and trying to use it in the first instance is always the best advice, because at least people can perform a view themselves as to whether it works for them in their situation or perhaps not, you know, and then they can maybe spend some time learning about techniques that are more valuable to them in their current situation. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you can actually have a little bit of fun with these things as well. I mean, for me as a new BA at the time, I thought, oh, wow, I've got another tool in the toolkit. You know, if you've got a skills matrix, you know, very early in your career, you probably feel great about putting a proficient in that box on the matrix. So it can be a little bit of a confidence booster building, you know, these techniques as well. So yeah, it's a great thing to sort of get close to, I think, just what other skills you can pick up along the way.
So it makes me think of a document. I used to work for RBS many years ago, and I think I left behind a BA toolkit. Was basically just my musings of different tools that I used. And I will shout out to Lee Grogan. So hello, Lee, if you're listening. But yeah, Lee has reminded me since then a few times of the existence of that BA toolkit. Seems to still be carried on despite my absence for some time. Hopefully people have bolted a few more things to it since I last left it anyway. It does get me thinking. It also makes me think as well, I mean, like in terms of like techniques that I might affiliate or use in conjunction with Pareto. I think the SWOT analysis, where we're thinking about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, applying Pareto to each of those, or even the whole list of possible outcomes, is a good way to like pinpoint which we should be focusing on and which we should be looking to change strategically. So I think that definitely applies. I think the other thing as well makes me think of is that, you know, we don't have to necessarily be too wedded to the 80-20, and probably in a lot of cases, we'll use the principles of Pareto and we'll apply metrics to the things we're measuring, whether it's issues or themes or otherwise. And actually, we might not find it's as neatly distributed as that we've got, you know, like 20% of issues are responsible for 80% of the problems. It could actually be that actually we've got a distribution of maybe 5 or 50% of the issues are actually accounting for 50% of the pain that we're experiencing as well. So definitely people shouldn't worry if they do a Pareto analysis and they don't get a 20-80 split or 80-20 split all times. There will probably be a difference.
I have seen so many cases where people use 70-30 and 60-40 as well, and they call it Pareto. Yeah. It all depends on which process you want to use and what impact do you want to have with this Pareto analysis, and what is your end goal. So I have many times seen people using 70-30, even 50-50 combination as well.
I think Sarah mentioned it earlier on in terms of like I think it was a chart or a graph. Quite often, you know, the output of a Pareto analysis is a set of those things we're measuring represented as a graph, and where you're applying the scores and the metrics to them. You know, and I think about a bar chart being an obvious example where one of the issues will have a higher bar than the others, whether that's an 80% bar or who knows, but at least have a higher bar. So visually, it's very obvious that that's probably the area to focus in first, you know, and it's therefore serves its purpose. And if you've got data behind it, then, you know, typically the process of then agreeing that you're going to allocate resource or time, or it's the thing to focus on, probably a little bit simpler if it's data driven rather than emotion driven, as it were. I guess then just build on that. I mean, I think we've spoken about data and collection, and we may have talked about some of these things, but in terms of finally what measures that you might take to ensure the quality and the reliability of the data that you've used as well. So I guess I know we've talked about, you know, in Sarah's case, pulling information from 2 different sources, and therefore it's probably reliable. But are there any other steps that you might take or activity you might apply to your data to help you with your Pareto? And Sarah, perhaps I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, I think even when it comes to, you know, if you've got your data coming from a system or multiple systems, you're still going to group that data potentially to think of your solution options or where you can, you know, your pathways forward, and that's what you're going to choose probably through the decision making of Pareto. So it can be quite subjective, because if I think about the data that we're using on that particular example, as I said, you know, in the finance world, you might have maybe a high volume of transactions, but they really might be very low impacting. So gathering consensus between your stakeholders on, okay, this looks like the most frequent, is it where we really want to focus first? So it's a little bit more deciding which data you're going to focus on, really, rather than the quality of it. But I would say that's what I would emphasize, is don't just take it at face value where you should focus. It's really complemented, as I said earlier, about, you know, by consulting your stakeholders, consulting the people that do the role, if it's the kind of scenario that I've described, you know, some root cause analysis on some defects or training issues, things like that. Peer review, you know, a big fan of peer review in our world as well. So I was working with the BA mentor. When you're working with quite a lot of data, or you're collecting data or presenting it, it's always a good opportunity to tap into your BA colleagues for peer review. maybe even gathering some insight from a BI team or whatever, whatever your data setup is at your own organization. So use it as an opportunity to, spread your wings and get another view on how you're presenting data as well, I think. Obviously, just make sure that you really decide what your complete data set is. So you don't want to have any gaps. So any rare events missing, as I said earlier, from your data set. So if something happens once a year, but it's a big problem, you need to make sure that you include that in your data set. So there's a lot of subjectivity and a lot of conversation that I think that needs to happen to make sure that, you're using reliable data in your Pareto analysis.
That's right. I mean, as you were saying there, Sarah, it made me think about this mortgages survey we did a few years ago. I feel like I've been talking about it quite recently as well. So that's why it's fresh in mind. In that, being a survey that went out to X thousand people to give a view on their mortgage experience. There was a lot of, I think, within the comments, as an example, comment type fields. You couldn't just use that as a basis to just do your analysis. You had to first go through, review it, cleanse the data in some cases because it had just poor characters or things to remove. Trying to slightly look at different when there were examples where the same thing was described but in slightly different ways. So to try and bucket that into the same theme, so that your Pareto analysis looks at those two examples as one as well. It certainly gets me thinking about that and the need for thinking about quality of data. And I think as well, I mean, the points you touched on there around the perspective that you're going to take on the data. So whether it's the transaction volumes, whether it's the importance, whether it's the impact, whether it's the risk, whether it's customer satisfaction, customer perspective. I could go on, I won't. But really thinking about what perspective you're going to apply, because it will be different in every type of analysis that you do. But I'll hand over to Lalita to give us further insight on that topic.
Sure. Sarah actually covered really well. So relevancy, reliability, accuracy should be the top priority when we are talking about if what data we are using in the Pareto analysis. Why I would say relevancy, because accuracy, obviously, completeness, obviously, but if data is not relevant what we are looking for, then we will not get any insights from that. So relevancy is absolutely up for it. And being BA, sometimes we are not domain experts. Sometimes we are not the IT and data experts. So we need to connect with the subject matter experts on that domain, and also the database people who know the data in and out. We can ask them that, okay, which field represents what? Can we use that for this analysis? They can give us better insight. And in fact, I have seen a couple of scenarios where we as business analysts, we think, okay, this field name suggests this thing, so we can use this. And ultimately, that is not the field that we want to use. We want to use some more attributes from the data, which database developer or database administrator can tell us. We do have some more data, which will give you better insights and which is actually more relevant to the KPI you are looking for. So it's always connect with the experts and ask questions, ask the right questions, and ask the follow-up questions as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, overall, if this is, you're using data to help decision making, so it's got to be right, and you're going to have to agree on what data you're looking at. If you're on a project that I was on, you could go so far back in terms of your data window, and you can't, there are just constraints. You have to have a cutoff point sometimes with the data set that you're going to look at. That's really important. But, consulting the experts, so in my case, accountants who are in that data every day, you help us look at, you help us choose the data set, and then we will go forth and support you in that analysis. But yeah, I would say you've got to start this right. Otherwise, you'll get to present your Pareto chart and you'll be presenting a load of junk really that you can't rely on.
Exactly. And you won't get anything out of it. If you'll present it, no stakeholder will take interest in it, because you are presenting KPIs which they are not interested in. They are like, we were asking some other data. You are presenting us something completely different. How would we take the decision on that?
Yeah, when it comes back to the root causes, even if you're being presented with some data from two different systems as I was, you know, be mindful that actually some of that data can be automated and some of it manually created. Accountants do a lot of weird things, you know, creating manual transactions, and you can end up with duplicate data. So try and dupe your data, make sure you have the right level of sort of interviews early in that data collection process to say, are all these transactions, you know, as straightforward as they look? You don't want to count anything twice. Otherwise, you know, again, back to your vital few, they're not going to be accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I feel like we've come to a nice conclusion actually in terms of Pareto, because we've talked about a lot of techniques, and actually, as Lalita was mentioning there, and yourself, Sarah, that, you know, as well, there is a connect to the conversations that you're having with your stakeholders as well. So it's not all about just a connection of all these different BA techniques. It's actually a connection to the quite fundamental thing we do, which is speaking to people, hearing what they've got to say, collecting information from them, and then applying these techniques to it. So that feels like we'll finish on a high and stop there. But thank you both for your insights and your knowledge about Pareto analysis. As I always do, I've learned a little something on the topic myself. Hopefully a few people are a little bit more educated about Pareto, and maybe the three of us, it might give us a nudge to dust it off dust the cobwebs off of the Pareto analysis in our BA toolbox and use it very soon. But thank you both again anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Bo. Thanks, John.